So let's go there, though, if we can. Let's go to race, and let's go to my old friend Max Boot, who's undergone a conversion experience, and we'll say, and is not the only one to say, look, guys, let's face it. Race is a big part of the radicalization of the Republican right. It may not be old-fashioned Southern-style racism where you want separate drinking fountains, but it is whites, basically conservative Christian whites who feel entitled to run the country, who feel threatened by the rise of other groups and a kind of pluralism they haven't seen before. And so they're doing whatever they need to do to retain power, and race lies at the bottom of it. And how else do you explain, Trump's rise to power on the birther theory and tweeting things like, American-born African Americans should go back to their country and so forth. Do you think he's right?
No. I mean, is he partially right? Sure. I think I underestimated the degree to which some of the opposition to Obama was race-based, to be sure. But where to start? So, I've lived in conservative institutions my entire professional life, right? AI, National Review, various other places. And when I heard people like, I don't know, Jonathan Chait, who made similar arguments for years, about how race is a big driver of conservative policies and so forth, among the sort of elites that I knew, it just rang false, right? So I'm not talking about party people. I'm just talking about the sort of intellectual types. It just rang false. And we just didn't have those kinds of, I wasn't privy to those kinds of conversations. I didn't hear about those kinds of conversations. Occasionally you would hear about some crackpot at the fringe, but for the most part, the sort of white panic racism stuff was not part of my worldview. I drive a lot of people crazy with this, but I think there's a lot of blame to go around. And I think that one of the reasons why the critical race theory stuff, the Ibram Kendi stuff, is so incendiary on the right is because it kind of makes plain the argument that liberals were making for a very long time, that basically if you disagree with them, you're racist, right? Ibram Kendi's position is you can't be race neutral. You have to be anti-racist, and people like him get to define what anti-racism means. And I bring this up all the time, but it was an interesting tell that at the height of the Tea Party stuff, probably the two most popular Tea Party figures were Herman Cain and Ben Carson. Now, flawed people, that's a perfectly fine argument to make, but I think that was a tell that a lot of conservatives, including pretty radical ones, really, really resent being called racist. I know that this was one of the driving passions for my late friend Andrew Breitbart. It was that it drove him crazy how conservatives were always called the racist ones simply for disagreeing with whatever Democrats wanted to do. Now, I'm willing to stipulate that there was some racism on the right, but I don't think people who want to make that argument, that as you characterized it, are willing to sufficiently acknowledge the degree to which a lot of conservatives were radicalized by that kind of discourse over the last 15 years. I can't tell you how many conservatives I would meet in airports or at speeches who would be enraged at the claims that were common in elite liberal circles, that to disagree with Obamacare was because Barack Obama was black. It was that kind of argument was made all the time, and it infuriated a lot of right-wingers. I mean, it really infuriated, and I think legitimately so, because, conservatives have been opposed to what they think is socialized medicine for a very long time. And I think the rise of identity politics discourse on the left gave a lot of conservatives permission structure to embrace identity politics thinking on the right, which is poisonous and horrible. But I think Colin Powell could have been the first black president of the United States quite easily in 1996 if he had opted to run. I'm not saying quite easily. I think it's quite plausible he could have. And a lot of the people who are today older presumably more racist types, would have voted for him with alacrity. And so I think that it's too pat to talk about how the right has always been racist, always been driven by racism. It is a much more dialectic thing where people take their cues from the other side and they get them all distorted. Now, I think the problem is that a lot of people on the right have convinced themselves it's okay to be racist, or it's okay to say racist stuff that they may or may not actually believe, because it owns the libs. They've basically given themselves permission to be jackasses, and sometimes actual bigots.